Greetings, legendary listeners. Welcome to the Marvelous TV Club, your headquarters for the most creative discussions of the latest episodes of Marvel television. It's summertime, and that means a lot of travel, some family time, that sort of thing, at least for me. So I appreciate y'all bearing with us as we ease our way through the August heat. The Marvel content schedule does not let up, though, and we're already 3 episodes into our first ever animated MCU series, What If? That puts us a third of the way through the season and makes it a good time to check in. Now, because the end of Loki and the start of What If have introduced the multiverse, that means all sorts of new possibilities and combinations are rippling all the way through to the Marvelous TV Club. I'm the host of the MTVC, Marc Folletti. Nobody has erased me yet. But I'm joined by a new combo for this episode. From the popular website Salon.com, it's writer Amanda Marcotte. Welcome back to the pod, Amanda.
Coming at you from every timeline.
And teaming up with her today is a hero of the justice system on any timeline, Jesse Taylor. How's it going, man?
You know, what if I weren't a lawyer? How would this start?
Well, I guess it depends on what job you would have instead. I mean, I could always intro this by talking about your Twitter feed, which is legitimately a work of art, but I'm not sure anyone really wants to be known for their Twitter.
Nobody wants their legacy to be I tweeted a lot.
Now, since we last talked, we've had the release of Black Widow, we've had the announcement of the Hawkeye series debut on November 24th, and the new trailer for Spider-Man No Way Home. Jesse, which of those things are or were you most excited about?
Right now, I'm most excited about Spider-Man. 2 reasons. One, I just love a big Christmas movie. Even though it doesn't look like it'll be Christmas themed, it's still going to be the Christmas tentpole movie. And in terms of getting back to something regular in society, that's what I want. Also, it looks like it's going to be absolutely bananas. It might be good. It might completely go off the rails, i.e. Doctor Strange literally taking a train off the rails. But it's going to be something, and it's going to try some things that we haven't seen before. It just makes me so excited.
Amanda, which of those things rise to the top for you?
Boy, it's really hard to tell. I mean, on one hand, I really, really love Tom Holland as Spider-Man, even though sometimes it makes me feel like a dirty old woman, you know, my affection for that character. But on the other hand, as much as Jeremy Renner is not necessarily my favorite actor, I really, really loved the Matt Fraction Hawkeye, and I really look forward to seeing it on screen, especially if Pizza Dog's going to be a character, and I've heard that he is. So, I don't know. Tom Holland, great dancer, but Pizza Dog, so I'm going to kind of have to vote for Pizza Dog.
Pizza Dog's pretty great. I think I saw an Instagram post that involved a dog being on set, so I'm pretty excited about that. No spoilers, hopefully, for folks. There's a dog. Hopefully, that's not ruining your Hawkeye experience, gang. I'll vote for Black Widow just because, 1, Florence Pugh was incredible, and 2, I think she's going to play a pretty big role in the Hawkeye series, so we kind of get both and by voting for Black Widow, but it just felt really good to see a Marvel movie in the theater again, which we did for Black Widow. And again, I think that Yelena's character was really interesting and fun, and I can't wait to see more of her. So I thought that was a pretty good welcome back to the screen and well worth the wait. But look, all those things are great. What we're really here to discuss, though, is the newest show, What If? Now, I've got questions for y'all in 3 specific areas. What do we think of the series itself? What we love most and least about the characters we've met? And I want us to do a bit of speculation about the future of What If in the larger MCU. But let's start with the series. Now, we've seen these 3 episodes so far. We've got Peggy Carter as Captain Carter, featuring Steve Rogers as the Hydra Stomper. We've had T'Challa as Star-Lord, featuring Bombshell Nebula and Zaddy Thanos. And we've had the Avengers being serial killed, featuring a wild-eyed Hank Pym as Yellow Jacket. Amanda, let's start with you. Looking over the series as a whole so far, what has been your favorite moment?
I really was struggling to settle on one, so just rapid fire 3.
Dang it.
In the Peggy episode, I really felt like the action was the best out of the 3 episodes. In the Black Panther / Star-Lord episode, I felt like that the comedy was the best. I was just laughing my ass off through that episode. And then in the third one, I really liked watching Nick Fury and Natasha, like their relationship, which is always hinted at in the other movies, but we really got to see it fleshed out fully in this episode, and that was a real delight. So 1 for each. I know it's cheating.
You cheater. Yeah, that's some cheating. Jesse, can you please do better and not cheat and give me one good answer?
Well, you know me. I'm always the person at the front of the class, eager to give the teacher the exact answer they want. I'm going to go recency bias, actually. Conqueror Loki from the 3rd episode. We saw a lot of different kinds of Loki in the series. What we never saw, though, was a completely successful Loki. One who fully realized his dreams of conquest and glorious purpose. And the fact that he did it in a day, that Yellow Jacket / Hank Pym cleared the way for Loki to come to Earth, and not only to come to Earth and conquer, but to have a completely justifiable reason for doing so. That, I thought, was the most clever part of that episode, and so far, I think the best use of the what if concept.
So what makes it the best use in your opinion, then? Tell me a little bit more about that.
So we've talked about this before. I read a lot of what if, especially in the 80s and 90s. The thing I always liked about what if is when it showed a character accomplishing something or behaving in a way that they'd been restricted from in the comics before. Where a Spider-Man got to be completely selfish, or Spider-Man got everything he wanted. Where Captain America never came back to life, and all the various characters who were influenced or formed by Captain America never had that influence. And so what I truly like about that aspect of Loki from this What If episode is the fact that you finally get to see him unrestrained and confident and successful in a way that even a show about a multiverse full of Lokis never got to.
Yeah, that's a great point. The ripple effects from that would be interesting to follow up on, and I'm curious how much the show will do some of that. I was a big fan of the Korath arc in the Star-Lord episode, right? This is Jimon Hansu's character. He's the guy who opens up fighting Peter Quill in Guardians of the Galaxy, but of course, by the middle of this episode, he's talking about his best friend T'Challa at every turn. And it felt like a really fun way to bring a sort of limited side character into the universe more, and also framed up everything that is different about one Star-Lord versus the other. And so every time he was making jokes, even though it was kind of the same joke over and over again, I was endlessly delighted by that aspect of the series. Well, what about the challenges, limitations, and disappointments of the series for you thus far? There's been some stuff that I think maybe we all haven't loved, so I want to kind of pick your brains on that a little bit. Jesse, let's start with you. Where do you land on the thing that has kind of come up short for you the most?
I'm going to pull an Amanda and actually give 2 answers.
God damn.
I've created a monster.
You are the multiversal chaos, Amanda.
What if Jesse was more like Amanda?
I've got more of a comment than a question.
Oh God. Oh man, now we're just full on like nightmare panelist situation.
So the first part actually came in the first episode, or the first answer came in the first episode. The Captain Carter saga was just pretty much a straightforward retelling of the first Avenger, without much change, other than the fact that the Winter Soldier never occurred, or at least as far as we know, Bucky never became the Winter Soldier. And it just felt flat for all the things that you could have explored in terms of the only super soldier on Earth being a woman, being British instead of American, not having the opportunity to fight to become a symbol like Captain America necessarily did. It just wasn't explored. So instead what we got was a story that these 2 people that fell in immediate, deep, and unfulfilled love in the original movie did the exact same thing, except in one case, Steve Carter, or not Steve Carter, maybe he took her name, I don't know. Steve Rogers was the massive peak human beefcake stud, and in the other case, Peggy Carter was. And I love that they went full force with it. She became big and strong and just had all these great action scenes. But if you watched the original movie and then watched this episode, it was just a character swap in many ways.
Mm-hmm.
That gets into my second challenge / disappointment of the show, which is that so far I feel like when the show's at its best, what I want is more of it. I would rather have 3 90-minute movies than to have 9 30 to 35-minute episodes. I'm always just left wanting more of the good stuff, but also feeling like we had to speed through a lot of plot points to get to whatever the twist or resolution of the story is.
Yeah, I think I've felt that way a lot myself, honestly. I sometimes feel, especially the first one, because it was, like you said, so beat for the first movie. You didn't get to live in the story as much as you did in the first movie. Not that that would have been any better, because then it would have just been the same movie. But I think that it really kind of underscored how rushed it feels for, which is such a contrast with the other Marvel TV shows, because they've actually got more space to tell their stories.
Yeah, it definitely feels like a lot of things are being told to us about versus shown to us, and we're either sort of forced to add our own emotional investment and assume a lot of things. The death of Hope Van Dyne, we don't even know how she died. She just died on some mission. We don't get any real context for that. Or, the fact that they're relying on our preconceived connections to these characters to draw us in. It is true that they are definitely rushing through a lot of things. Amanda, what did you find as the biggest challenge or disappointment as you've watched these first 3 episodes unfold?
Despite that, what Jesse said, I have really kind of enjoyed it. I've taken them as like cartoons, and cartoons kind of always go fast. But I would say that the first episode disappointed me a lot, because I love the character of Peggy Carter. I think she's tough. I think she's cool. And I think there could have been a real opportunity to do something more interesting than the trite girl power version of feminism that was on screen. I mean, you contrast it with Falcon and the Winter Soldier, which wasn't as cheeky and fun necessarily, but at least took seriously like the fact that a Black Captain America would have a profoundly different experience than a white Captain America at the same time. And I feel like Peggy overcame sexism with moxie. And, it's one of those things where it's like, I don't think they needed to make it about her being a woman. It didn't have to be about sexism if they wanted to like not have it be weighed down with the heaviness of this issue, which I totally understand. It's a 30-minute cartoon. They could have just had her overcome it with moxie just by not dealing with it. I think what would have been more interesting than what if Captain America was a girl is what if Captain America was Captain Britain, which is what she was. But like in no way, shape, or form did they deal with the fact that she's a British agent. She's not an American. And all the episode I could do was spend my time wondering, why does she answer to the president and not, the prime minister? Like, where are the other British troops? Like, why are we not seeing the war from the English side? Why is she not actually Captain Britain despite having the Union Jack on her shield? I don't know that would have necessarily been more interesting than Girl Power Peggy, but it would have been unexpected. It would have been the sort of thing where you're not centering gender in every story about every woman. And it would have gotten away from some of, I think, the more annoying aspects of essentializing female superheroes to their gender.
And something I just thought about with respect to what Amanda said is, if you think about the characters that were actually in the episode, there's a very limited cast. You have basically Howard Stark, Steve Rogers, the Howling Commandos once they come in, but they're very tangential characters. The general whose name I forget, and the Red Skull. That's pretty much it. Mm-hmm. So you never get to see any interplay between Peggy Carter and the public, regardless of which tack you want to take. You don't get to see her literally go be British anywhere. You don't get to see her even be a woman anywhere except around these men. Whatever theme you want to take from this episode, there's no interplay in terms of what it actually means.
Imagine Peggy like single-handedly stopping the Blitz. Wouldn't that have been cool?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a strange choice because in the Star-Lord episode, they did tease out a pretty different universe, a fundamental series of changes through the Collector, all of Thanos' hench people who go to the other side, obviously Thanos and his reforms, all of that is completely different. So it's strange that the Peggy Carter episode was so limited in that way because, yeah, like you said, Amanda, it makes no sense that the US president has control over Captain Britain and or she should be in an American outfit. And, you know, obviously it's their tech, I guess. That's the best argument I guess you can make for why she's doing that. But then, you know, we also, even the shield itself was kind of an afterthought, just kind of tossed in. It makes no sense as to why Peggy Carter specifically got the shield. We know why Steve did. They spent a whole scene on it in the movie. And also it was part of his USO outfit. All of that made more sense. Here it's just like, oh, cool, I have a shield now because Captain America has a shield. And that just isn't good storytelling.
Yeah, I mean, I liked the episode, but I think Haley Atwell carried it on her back, basically.
I agree. And a lot of the actors have been fantastic as voice actors, but I think for me, the biggest challenge, limitation, or disappointment has been the uneven performances that we've gotten, including from some of the big name folks. So I think Haley Atwell performed super well. Obviously, Chadwick Boseman was incredible. I think Karen Gillan was excellent as Nebula. Josh Brolin as Thanos. Nick Fury, man. I mean, Samuel L. Jackson was awesome in that last episode. I don't know. There were some really up and down ones, though. Dominic Cooper as Howard Stark, really, voice acting didn't really seem like his kind of a thing. We'd seen an Instagram clip, actually, of Sebastian Stan recording his clips, and you could see that it was just him on a mic responding to someone off screen with the sheet of paper, and the way that he was reading those lines in the episode felt like that. Now, maybe that's just because I'm biased because I saw this clip and I know how it was recorded, but a lot of the show had that feeling of people who weren't actually talking to each other and or are just not experienced voice actors, like a lot of the people who've had to step into fill roles. The guy who played Steve Rogers did a great job, in my opinion. Ross Marquand, who's been Red Skull both for the Infinity War Endgame movies and for this show, was excellent. And again, some of the name actors are outstanding, but the performances and their interactivity really leave me wanting because the MCU, first and foremost for me, has been about chemistry. And it's just not there in a lot of these episodes.
And as a parent of young children, I have watched many a movie and TV show voiced by, you know, a whole cadre of celebrities. And they're always very uneven. And one of the reasons is that if you're not recording in the same room, like you pointed out, it works the same way acting in person does. If you filmed a TV show where you just have shot, and everybody's in a different room, not responding to another person, it's going to come off differently than if it's filmed as a standard TV show where you are filming a scene together with interplay, feedback, etc. And in many animated movies, you can tell when a celebrity has kind of come in to drop their few lines and then get out. For instance, we just watched the Paw Patrol movie this weekend, which no great artistic feat, but it was perfectly fine for what it was. A little G-rated movie that just shows that if you believe in yourself, you can accomplish anything, exactly what you want. But there were many celebrity cameos in it. I'm not sure when they were taped, but some of them did feel like they were being delivered at somebody's house during COVID. They sent Jimmy Kimmel a script. And maybe he was even on the phone with somebody, but definitely not the actor who was playing a Paw Patrol pup or something like that. And his lines just come off like, I don't know what's necessarily happening in this scene, but I'll give it my best and you'll just work on it in post.
Michael Caine, of all people, has an acting philosophy, which is very simply, he just does his line as though the person opposite him said their lines the way he wishes they did. So their performances never really affect his. And I'm not sure I would think that's a great way to act in person, but it feels like the folks who are able to unlock really great voice acting must have something similar, right? Because they do act like this in a vacuum. So, Samuel L. Jackson, all of the little nuances of his performance, or even Lake Bell, who played a great Black Widow. I thought she was a fantastic Natasha. I thought it was Scarlett Johansson until I saw the credits, and then I was just like, holy cow. These actors are able to do the little things in spite of that, whereas other folks, I think, really struggled in that vacuum. But it's to be expected. A lot of them have never really had to do this before. Amanda, we talk a lot about themes on Storycast, and I want to know if you think there's any kind of a theme or series arc emerging at all across these episodes, or is this just not that kind of show?
No, I mean, it is. The one thing they've been very good at the Marvelous TV shows is themes. And I think the theme that's holding these episodes together, and I would be shocked if it's not holding the entire season together, is the inevitability of heroics, which is to say there's an optimism of the show that when the chips are down, there will always be somebody who rises to the occasion. And so even if the third episode was the most obvious of these, right? All the Avengers are killed, and yet we still have people rising up to be Avengers. And I think that, but the other two episodes, I mean, Peggy steps forward when Steve can't do the job. And in the second one, you really kind of see how T'Challa leads all these people that are ne'er-do-wells in other universes to be the heroes of this story. So I think what we're kind of seeing is like a goodness in all people kind of thing. Not the deepest of themes, but perfectly good for a children's show, which is what I kind of think this is more than the other ones.
Even with a giant emerging tentacle monster that Captain Carter had to fight.
I can't wait for the plushy version of Shumagorath.
I feel like sublimated psychosexual stuff is part of children's entertainment. The sublimated part is a huge part of that.
Well, when I have to watch Peppa Pig tonight, I'll be on the lookout for that.
Oh, man. Yeah, I feel like any follow-up to that is just going to get someone in trouble. I will leave it there. Did you spot a theme at all, Jesse, when you were watching these episodes?
I think it came out most in the third episode, but there's also something about the way in which the chips have to fall in order for the events we know to have occurred. That, particularly in the third episode, although I don't think the plot twist was delivered nearly as well as it could have been, what everything about the Avengers Initiative hinged on was Hope Van Dyne's decision years before it ever occurred. And had she decided to be a S.H.I.E.L.D. agent instead of to go work for her father's company, you have this entire path where the world is on a completely different course. Who knows if Captain Marvel will be able to stop Loki and the forces of Asgard, but it'll be another massive battle. But also many, many people who had roles in changing the course of the world no longer exist. And as you go down the path of Iron Man's dead, Black Widow's dead, Thor and Hulk are dead, you then have all the people they influenced, and we still don't know what happens with the Infinity Stones. We don't know what happens with the Age of Ultron, given that there wouldn't be an Ultron necessarily, but there would still be Baron, Zemo, and any number of other folks who are now out with the same plans, but do not have the Avengers as they currently exist to stop them. I'm interested to see where the next 6 episodes go with regard to themes, because at this point, we've kind of plumbed all of the Phase 1 Marvel movies, gotten a little bit into Phase 2. So it'll be interesting to see if they keep going back to events from those movies. Maybe we start moving on. I know we're going to get Spider-Man and Doctor Strange, and we know the plots of a couple of other episodes. But it'll just be very interesting to see how much are we going to keep going back to Captain America, the First Avenger? We've already been there twice. Are we going to get into Captain Marvel? Are we going to do some Ant-Man and Wasp? Because I would love to just see a lighter Ant-Man and Wasp episode that's not about everyone dying. That would be fantastic.
Yeah, the stakes get really big really fast in these episodes usually. I had tried to answer this question by thinking about what it has to say about the immutability of good and evil. So on one hand, you have people like Thanos, Nebula, to some extent even potentially Loki, though obviously by the end of the third episode, he's pretty evil again. But some of these characters have high variability in whether or not they turn out good or evil. Hank Pym is a serial killer. We'll talk about that as we continue on this discussion. But at the same time, some people like Steve Rogers or the Red Skull or Nick Fury or Natasha Romanoff, you know, they kind of tend towards goodness or badness, no matter what happens. I couldn't really find anything in there. Did either of you spot anything worth talking about on that, Amanda?
No, outside of the sense that the universe kind of, when there's a vacuum that needs a hero, someone fills it.
Mm-hmm.
Every single time. Yes, some people are a little bit more good than others, but I think as with the Loki series, this series is definitely exploring the idea that as uncomfortable as it could make us, a lot of us have a mix of good and bad in us, and depending on circumstances, one could win out over the other.
Well, and the Collector fills the gap that Thanos leaves behind on the bad side in the Star-Lord episode. So it does seem like you're saying it's like there are these vacuums, there are these things that need to get filled, which is in many ways a pretty rich commentary on history because, you know, there are a lot of folks who believe that like if Hitler hadn't been born, the world would be different. And there are a lot of people who believe somebody was always going to step up to seize on the energy and anger that the German people had in the wake of World War I. So Marvel Universe seems to strongly be landing in the latter camp, which is to say they are not they do not subscribe to the great man of history theory that says, you know, these things can be changed entirely by just like one person's birth, but more often people are responding to moments and forces outside of any one individual.
It's pretty amazing that a TV show about superheroes is against the great man of history theory.
That's a really good point.
Yeah. But I'll say it's picking up on the central theme of Into the Spider-Verse too, which is that Spider-Man is something you are and something you become rather than one person that no one could replace. And it's part of what made Into the Spider-Verse probably one of the best superheroes ever moved, one of the best superhero movies ever made. And again, like this, it was animated. It's easier to explore that in an animated realm because you can do so many different iterations of the same character with just voice acting and animation instead of having to actually pay to have 15 different Spider-Men on screen. Although we now know that we're probably going to have 15 different Spider-Men on screen come Christmas time.
Overall, Jesse, what is your assessment of What If? Is it good and or do you like it?
It gives me a lot of nostalgic feels for reading What If back when I was younger, because it has that same variability. There's parts of it that really intrigue and are exciting, and you say, I want even more of that. And then there's parts of it that are just, I've seen this before. Thanks for telling me. Can we get to the new plot or the new thing? And What If has always had issues with the execution of the central concept. And the issue has always been that you're so married to these characters, it's hard to do anything to them that fundamentally changes who they are. And that's why I think what we're going to keep seeing over and over again is that either bad characters become good, bad guys become heroes, as in Thanos and Nebula, or if good guys become bad guys, it'll be a side character, someone who's not a direct MCU mainline hero, such as Hank Pym, so that we can still preserve our image of all of our heroes, all of our central guys. Everybody you're going to find on a 6-year-old's book bag is ultimately going to be that same character, regardless of how they look at the end of the day.
Amanda, what do you think?
I've been enjoying it, but I think for similar reasons, it's like kind of like reading a lot of comic books that are not necessarily the best comic books ever. They're just a fun way to spend time. I really like so far the action sequences. I think a lot of the animation is good. It was fun to see Peggy and Steve's kind of fighting together and Steve be like the original Iron Man. I really, I liked the fun kind of, what if Godzilla fought this other sea monster or whatever. part of the third episode one where it was like, it kind of was positing that Ant-Man was the most powerful superhero because he can kill literally anyone, which was pretty fun for me. But I would say only the second one so far, I think, has done anything deeper than just cool shit. And we'll talk about that in a minute, I suspect.
What If is facing a very difficult problem, which is that most of the MCU products are really good. They're well paced, they're well acted, all the chemistry stuff we talked about before. And I do think that the format of it, the limitations that you talked about, Jesse, definitely leave me wanting more. But I will say this, I have enjoyed each episode more the second time. I did not expect that to be the case. I was actually I wouldn't say dreading. I wasn't like thrilled for the chance to rewatch everything again, but we did last night before we did this show. And I had way more fun actually anticipating without having to wonder what was going to happen next and avoid the sort of cheap thrills aspect and more spend time in each moment and look for little details and just kind of enjoy it unfolding. But yeah, there's a lot here, but I come back to what you said, Jesse, which is I would rather have fewer things well told over a longer period of time than these rush jobs into little spaces where we have to make a lot of assumptions and they don't have a lot of time to give us cool little moments, which is in many ways what people remember about the MCU. I guarantee you what everyone will remember is that quote from T'Challa as Star-Lord, sometimes the best weapon in your arsenal is just a good argument. Those little kinds of moments are the things that stick with us about the MCU. Speaking of character moments that we love, let us dive into the characters themselves. Amanda, which of the main characters of these 3 episodes have you enjoyed the most or been the most impressed by? Are you going to give me 17 of them, or will you pick just one?
I'm going to pick one. I'm going to pick the one everyone's going to pick. It's obviously T'Challa.
Yeah.
I mean, and this is kind of what I was getting at before. What I did expect was it'll be fun to see the most lawful good character in the entire MCU be a space pirate. What I didn't expect was how moved I was by how much personal growth that gave T'Challa over what he was at the beginning of the Black Panther movie, I'd argue. Like, we see him really blossom as a space pirate.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I think I've seen a lot of people's takes on the show where they were like, whoa, it's funny that T'Challa like became this great diplomat that got all these people together. That's just who he was in Black Panther. I'm like, nah. In the Black Panther movie, he was not a good diplomat. He had conflicts with everybody. He had trouble bringing people together, and he had almost no relationship to the outside world. And the first Avengers movie where we see him, Civil War, he immediately gets to punching people. He's not a good diplomat in those movies. He has to come around towards his whole journey in Black Panther is about learning to embrace the outside world, starting the Science Center in Oakland, you know, becoming that thing. But in this episode, he naturally grows into that role by being a space pirate. And the reason is, I think, because he's removed from Wakanda, which in the Black Panther movie is portrayed as a very isolationist nation. And he was constrained and restricted as a person, and his personal growth, I think, was really restricted by growing up in that environment. So I thought that was actually pretty interesting.
And since Amanda took the obvious answer, I will go with Nick Fury.
Mm-hmm.
My second time watching episode 3, it really changed how I thought of that portrayal. The first time I watched the episode, I was a little bit frustrated. And the reason I was frustrated is because these proto-Avengers keep dying over and over again, one a day, basically. And Nick Fury's response is to just be stoic and keep pushing forward and trying to figure out what's going on. Watching it again, I realized what's happening there is he's a soldier. He's trying to get an army together. Somebody's interfering with that army. He has a mission. He's trying to complete that mission. And he ultimately comes to an alliance necessary to accomplish that mission, or at least figure out what's been interfering with it. And even after it all goes to hell from Tuesday to Friday, On Friday, he's just got another plan. And I love that. That resolution of the episode actually it redeemed the quickness and the weird plot choices in the episode for me, because it at least shows that Nick Fury is a man who never is without some sort of plan. And it just reminds you how much it took in the first place for him to get the Avengers Initiative together, even though it all goes to hell in this universe.
Yeah, I obviously enjoy the second episode the most, but I do agree that Nick Fury is where I lean on this, just because there was more of an arc for him. The difference between this T'Challa and our T'Challa in the MCU is fascinating, but he is a little bit perfect in this, and that's cool, but I really loved everything around him a little bit more than I actually loved him as a character. So I tended to be more compelled by the challenges Nick Fury was facing. It felt like he was facing a more difficult set of obstacles, and we were just more in his head emotionally and stuff. So that kind of resonated with me a little bit, I think.
I mean, I will say that the implication of the second episode is that when T'Challa becomes king, he will be even better at it than he was.
Totally.
I don't think that Killmonger will get in his head as much in this universe.
Yeah, and we'll get a Killmonger episode, reportedly. Him and Tony Stark teaming up on something is what the advertisements show us, I think. So I'm looking forward to that. I assume it'll be in a different branch of the timeline, but you never know. But again, I loved all those side characters, so I'm curious, Jesse, which of the supporting or side characters did you find most interesting? Well, not one of the main ones, but one of the ones that sort of was, a little bit more on the periphery.
Even though it was the weakest episode, Steve Rogers from the first episode. I wish we could have gotten more exploration of how he was truly feeling, because he was supposed to be Captain America. He was supposed to be the one who received the serum, who had the powers, who was going to become this symbol to all America and to the world. And he didn't. And even though we didn't necessarily get to see him struggle with it, he did have his own struggles from the gunshot wound that he experienced. And you got to see him be truly supportive in a way that I didn't expect. You could have gone down the path of him being bitter and it turning him into this person who's jealous of what Peggy has and refuses to acknowledge her own struggles and sort of her own agency being taken from her because she was quote unquote the wrong person. And I love that what Steve ended up being was kind of what Peggy ended up being in the first movie, which is the person who always truly believed in him/her. I don't know which one I'm talking about now, and then my pronouns are getting confused. But the short version is I liked who and what he was in relation to Captain Carter. I honestly could have done without the Hydra Stomper. I understand why it came in, but it seemed like they lacked the confidence in Steve being who he was. And so they needed to give him something to do to bring him into the action, just to comfort everybody that Steve gets to kill some Nazis. And I'm happy he did. There should be more Nazi killing, but hey.
Amanda, what about you? Side characters that jumped out?
I really liked Thanos in the second episode. And the reason is it was a very sly and clever commentary on what makes people truly evil. Like you were saying, like the go back and kill Hitler, great man of history theory of these kinds of things. But what this episode was kind of suggesting is that there are many, many people among us, and I think this is absolutely true, who, if they were given an opportunity or just had a bad turn in life or some other thing went wrong or right for them, would be just horrible monsters, but right now are just annoying assholes on the internet. Like, and that's kind of what Thanos is. He's got this theory of not genocide that's actually just genocide, and he just thinks it's really cool, and he is just the guy on the internet bugging people with his stupid idea who just laugh at him instead of the guy who actually made it happen. And I think it was played off as a joke, and he actually does some truly heroic things, but we're reminded at the end when he's talking to the Wakandans at dinner about his idea that there are a lot of people out there that push him in the wrong direction and they could be bad Thanos. And right now they're just kind of slightly annoying Thanos.
Yeah, Thanos was awesome. I also, in that episode, found Yondu to be a lot of fun in the sort of version of the good dad that the end of Guardians 2 really signaled was there all along. And so the chance for him to just be a great mentor and really delegate and trust the people around him and just sort of seeing him be the better version of himself was great. And even those little moments, like at the end when he's with T'Challa's father, who's asking how he came to find T'Challa, and Yondu's like, and of course, T'Challa saves him and he's like, I was lost, Baba, and Yondu found me, so he gets rescued. But just watching him struggle in that moment, again, it struck me that this was so different than our Yondu, but it felt totally earned based on what we'd seen and his interactions with T'Challa. So that really warmed my heart. But there were also a lot of moments I think they could have done more with, of course. So Amanda, was there a side character especially, that you found most underutilized, or was there something that they missed, a whiff, that they should have hit more directly?
I hate to say it, but Bucky, man, Bucky was a failure as a character mostly. I think one of the most fun things about the first Avenger movie that they were able to carry forward into this cartoon is that snappy 40s dialogue, right? And they definitely wrote it. And Haley Atwell.
They definitely wrote it. Oh my God.
Like, it was on the page. I know that.
Yeah.
Yeah. A lot of his lines were great. He just whiffed, man. Just like you said. So I won't belabor the point. I'm a little sad because Sebastian Stan is one of my favorites. But you really have to bring that kind of 40s energy. It adds so much to the Captain America movies, and it was not there.
Can I just throw in as an aside on that? The wildest implication of the first episode is that there is no Winter Soldier. Now, in the MCU, that means there's no murder of Howard Stark in the 90s, or there might be very different outcomes for the Korean War and the Vietnam War and so many other things that played out. I feel like in the MCU, he probably killed John F. Kennedy. So many things could be different as a result of there not being a Winter Soldier. And I would love to know more about that. And I know they're going to return to this universe. They've said that the Peggy Carter storyline is one they're going to revisit in future seasons. But that just felt like something where, again, it's like not only did we not get a great version of Bucky, but the version of Bucky that was taken away is also this huge looming unanswered question.
I mean, Natasha can wear a bathing suit.
Oh, and then that is a great deep cut Winter Soldier style. She can, in fact, wear a bathing suit now. Jesse, what about you? Who whiffed?
So I'm going to go not whiff, but underutilized. Hope Van Dyne.
Yeah, man.
Like, I would have loved a 30-second scene that was her showing up to work on the first day of being a SHIELD agent. I don't know if you go to school. I don't know what happens. But showing up, going on missions, getting killed. So at least we knew what happened and maybe even why, as opposed to it being hidden the entire episode. And then she literally got fridged, but we didn't even know there was a fridge on screen until the episode was almost over.
As a total aside, I just finished watching the latest episodes of Grace and Frankie right before we watched that episode, so I couldn't help but think of Michael Douglas as actually his character on this show, which is like an elderly gay man who does a lot of musical theater, but now murderously angry at Nick Fury. Just, some fun stuff there.
I feel like my whiff is actually Hank Pym, and here's why. I buy the argument that if Hope Van Dyne joined S.H.I.E.L.D., which he would not want her to do based on how protective he was in that first movie, that he would want revenge. I even buy that Hank Pym could commit murder for his revenge and that he would absolutely target Nick Fury. What doesn't make any sense to me is that Hank Pym, the good guy overall that we know, makes a lot of mistakes, not great communicator, problems emotionally, all of that. He would not start murdering ancillary people. When they ask him about killing Thor, and he's just like, well, you would have sold him some hero junk, so I made sure he died. It doesn't align with enough of the Hank Pym that we know. However much he would be hurting, and I believe it would be a lot, to the point where he might try to kill Nick Fury, I can't see him trying to kill all of these other people. So that left me a little bit cold in that third episode.
I completely get that, because we just don't see enough of the transition from Hank Pym we know to Hank Pym we don't know to have it make sense. And even just something along the lines of Hope deciding to join S.H.I.E.L.D. and her insulting him, or them having a massive blowout because she decides to do it. Something that sets him down this path, instead of just saying, well, you're completely evil now. It's much easier, I think, in terms of these altered narratives, to go from bad guy to good guy with some bad ideas like we did with Thanos, than it is to go from good guy to serial killer for reasons unknown.
And I think their idea was that Hank always hates S.H.I.E.L.D., right? In every universe, he thinks they suck. But why does he think they suck in the universe that we're familiar with? Which is, he thinks they suck because he thinks that they cut corners, that they kill too many people, that they are reckless, right? So why on earth would he be those things in response to them?
That's interesting. Yeah, it doesn't really line up. I did enjoy the creativity of his kills. I have to give him that. Going inside the Hulk and blowing up his heart was a spectacularly gruesome finish for poor Bruce Banner. But
I mean, it's a full-on embrace of the pre-Endgame theory that Thanos died by Ant-Man going inside his butt and expanding. And so I do have to say, if that's the deep cut, I love it.
I feel like they started there. They were like, let's posit that Ant-Man is the most powerful of all superheroes, and just didn't really kind of think the rest through besides how cool it would be to watch him kill people.
The very first thing I said to Amanda after the episode, Jesse, was literally the Ant-Man shooting up the ass of Thanos theory. So I like that we're on the same page, that the whole genesis of this episode was probably some riff on the Ant-Man exploding Thanos from the inside. That would track for I think a really fun writer's room moment that we'll probably never get to hear about. So Jesse, was there an existing MCU character that was commented on, good or bad, by one of these episodes? Not a character we necessarily saw, but one of the ones we're familiar with.
Poor Peter Quill.
Tell me more.
Well, we have somebody taking over his identity as Star-Lord. And to be sure, it's T'Challa. It's a born king, a born leader. But we note that, as we talked about earlier, in this role as Star-Lord, he grows and expands and becomes more open-minded in a way that exceeds even what he was as the ruler of Wakanda. Whereas Peter Quill, we know what he's like as Star-Lord. He is a selfish asshole on his best day. And it's sad that we don't get to see the Guardians of the Galaxy. But at the same time, we know that because T'Challa was Star-Lord, Drax's family is alive. Thanos is not a tyrant. So many good things happen because Yondu picked T'Challa instead of Peter Quill. And the implication at the end of the episode is that Ego shows up, finds his son, and maybe persuades him to do all the evil things that Peter turned against in Guardians of the Galaxy 2. So, in a sense, T'Challa goes out and saves the universe 15 times over, everything Peter Quill wanted to do. And Peter Quill's actual destiny, had he not been picked up one night in Missouri, would be to maybe be the next Thanos.
It's entirely possible. The end of the episode, the Watcher just casually mentions that might be the end of Earth. So how ironic would it be if by picking up T'Challa instead, he saves the universe, but loses Earth to a very fussy Peter Quill.
Yes.
Amanda, what about you? Was there a character that was commented on in the MCU by one of these episodes?
I have a serious answer and a goofy one. Which one do you want to hear first?
Definitely Goofy.
Unbeatable Squirrel Girl.
Oh, okay.
Oh.
Tell me more.
Because clearly they just stole her storyline and gave it to T'Challa.
So tell folks about Unbeatable Squirrel Girl if they haven't read it yet. Why is that a riff on her idea?
If you haven't read Unbeatable Squirrel Girl, basically the premise of most of her comics is that she comes up against every single terrible villain in the Marvel universe, including Galactus and really seriously bad guys. And maybe she doesn't make them good, but she often talks them out of their worst plans through diplomacy, reason, and just a little bit of moxie. And it's adorable. They're very fun comics, and I think you should read them because I feel like they had a huge influence on the way that T'Challa was written in this episode, as someone who can just be like, hey, let's sit down, eat some nuts, so I don't have to kick some butts.
All right, and who's your serious answer?
My serious answer is the nation of Wakanda. I think that the movie Black Panther, again, was about T'Challa's sort of journey, learning from Killmonger that a lot of what he had been raised to believe about Wakanda was maybe wrong, that their kind of ideology of isolationism was hurtful to them, was hurtful to the world, was making him less good of a king, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that those criticisms of Wakanda are baked into the narrative. And I think that this episode kind of came at it from a different way, which was young T'Challa, somebody who already sees the world that way and acts on it. And he comes back bringing these lessons back to his nation. And I think that, again, the low key result is probably going to be that Killmonger is powerless against them because they've already absorbed his criticisms and become better for it.
That's interesting. I like that idea. I am very grateful that the MCU doesn't have a lot of torture sequences in it. I'm just sort of generally over that in filmmaking. But there is one person who is tortured physically and emotionally throughout the MCU, and it's Nebula. To see her living her best, most fabulous life was genuinely moving to me. Every single scene with her, I don't know. I felt all my feels about how hard life had been for her and how much of a struggle she had been through in the MCU. And I think this episode really drives home what a raw deal she got for most of her life in the MCU that we know and we're familiar with. And so I hope that our Nebula continues on her path out of that mess. But that is something for the future. And that is where I want to end our 9th question for our 9-episode series, What If? Let's talk about that future. Amanda, how important and or interrelated do you think What If will be to the larger MCU story going forward?
I don't know if any of these individual storylines are going to have any kind of like long-term impact on the series, but I do think this. I think that considering the way that Loki ended and Sylvie set off all these different timelines, I do think the implication is we're looking at what some of those timelines looked like. However, the other implication of Loki was that King the Conqueror came in, restarted the TVA, and then got all those timelines down to one timeline. It's just a different timeline now. So all this may have happened in the multi-branching that Sylvie created, and it may actually all already be erased by King the Conqueror. That is my theory.
Jesse, what about you?
What I was left with from Loki is that there's never a thing as full erasure. It may always come back, or it may just be shunted off to some other timeline. I think what's going to happen with What If is they're going to look at what gets the most feedback, what's popular, and find a way to carry that forward. And maybe in the what if format, animated, periodic specials, things like that. Or we could see it come into the mainline movies depending on what happens. I feel like the next probably 3 or so years of Marvel product is going to be them throwing everything at the screen and seeing what sticks. That's what the multiverse does. They've got all these other characters to bring in from Fox, plus things they want to play with, plus the fact that they're, just because of how time works, ironically enough, they're going to have to figure out ways to keep old ideas alive, even though the same actors aren't playing them anymore. So it might be that we do get some version of Captain Carter even on screen. It might be a CGI Haley Atwell. I'm not sure how that's going to come off. Maybe she could, gain a foot and about 100 pounds of muscle mass in real life. But I think it'll just be a wait and see kind of situation. I feel like we're going to get more and more what ifs, especially as we get the movies come back into theaters and we get more of that. I'm just not sure what the long-term multiverse plan is, especially for a package of characters and stories that Disney has tried so hard to keep rigorously interrelated, but also able to stand on their own. And I think it'll undercut that to some degree if you now need to be able to keep track of these multiple different versions of Captain America or of Nick Fury or whoever else comes along. My guess is what we'll see is a move toward the what if longer specials that I kind of mentioned at the beginning, that if you have a really good concept, one that you want to carry on, we might get the Captain's War against Loki coming out of episode 3. Or something along those lines.
Yeah, there's some real opportunity here for them to tease out, try out, test out some characters, to your point, Jesse, about all the different, things that they could do to learn what people like. And I think the key to What If's survival is also how I think it might connect to the larger MCU going forward. So Shumagorath is the name of a giant tentacle monster that many people say was probably basically the Hydra monster that we saw at the end of episode 1. And I think bringing in and testing out more concepts and characters inside the universe is the only way the show's going to survive, because there just isn't enough MCU content to keep making variations on how Hank Pym turns into a bad guy. Oh, but no, this episode, Hank Pym's the hero and Nick Fury's the bad guy. That's going to get really old really quickly. Whereas if they can bring in other aspects of the Marvel Comics universe and try out some characters, Ghost Rider or the Silver Surfer, fun characters like that would be great to try out in What If and bring them in contact with characters we're familiar with from the MCU, but on a lower stakes way where if we're not in love with kind of where that's going, they don't have to follow up on it. But for me, it would bring me more joy to have more universe and not less. Not having it's like, oh, well, the Collector now has a bunch of henchmen that are all exactly Thanos' old henchmen and no other new henchmen. Maybe one of the Wrecking Crew, which is like this really fun group of like bad guys from the Marvel Comics, could have been in that team. But no, we didn't get any of that. And it's like, that's a missed opportunity. And I hope that they fix that and use What If as a place to tease characters that might be coming, or to give us a chance to try on some characters that they might bring into the future.
Yeah, I mean, Marvel Comics have been published since the 40s. There's a nearly limitless number of C and D tier characters that it would take them years to get into a movie in any natural way. But you could easily do an episode where the Hulk smashes the wrong thing, and then all of a sudden this random nobody villain comes along and you get a cool arc about them or something like that. Mm-hmm. And then you test it out. And if it doesn't work, well, it was a What If episode. It doesn't count. And if it does work, oh, well, now they'll show up in a movie, maybe played by the same person who voiced them. And everybody's going to be more and more excited to see that character who, if you just brought them in Ant-Man 4 or, Eternals 2, people would just say, meh.
Give me my Stilt Man, Jesse. Give me my Stilt Man.
I mean, that's all. Stilt Man is always in my head, ever growing, ever expanding.
He's so shiny. I love him. Well, look, this was a really fun conversation. I really appreciate you guys talking What If with me. Jesse, if people want to talk What If with you, where can they find and follow you?
They can find and follow me on Twitter at Jesse L. Taylor. It's Jesse, because everyone in the history of humanity has spelled that name incorrectly.
Amanda, what about you? Where can people find and follow you?
I'm at Amanda Marcotte on Twitter. That's Marcotte. I note that I have not spelled it in previous episodes, and that's actually pretty hard to spell as well. I'm also at salon.com. You can find me there every day.
And of course, you can find me on Twitter at Marc Folletti. That is also Marc with a C, F as in Frank, Aletti. All right, Audio Avengers, that is the show for today. I have to be honest, I suspect we might do just one more What If show at the end of the series. It's been a fun watch, but it's not a show that I think is meant to be picked apart in great detail. And even if it is, it's not really doing it for me at that level. So let's give it some room to breathe, see where it takes us, and we'll circle back at the end to take stock of the full series. So look for that at the end of September. In the meantime, please feel free to leave us a 5-star review. We're well over 40, and every single one helps us stand out from the crowd. Until then, team, let's go see if Howard the Duck's around for happy hour, shall we?